So now we're getting into the continuous delivery and orchestration of our AWS deployment workflows in CI/CD. And so Code Pipeline really is going to be a visual tool to perform continuous delivery. And so the idea is that we're going to be able to orchestrate between sources, and these sources are going to be GitHub, Code Commit, maybe even Amazon S3, and then we're going to build stuff using Code Build that we haven't seen yet, or Jenkins, or any third-party tool really. And then you can also do load testing using whatever third-party tool you can think of. And then finally, once everything is done in your pipeline, you can deploy stuff using Amazon's own components such as Code Deploy, Beanstalk, CloudFormation, ECS, etc. And so your code pipeline is basically able to orchestrate all these things to provide a continuous delivery pipeline, hence the name. And so the pipeline is going to be made of stages. So each stage will have sequential actions and or parallel actions. So you're really able to customize your pipeline to perform, load testing, 3 types of load testing at the same time, or 2 types of build, one after the other, who knows. And the state examples you may have, as we said, is build, test, deploy, load test, but you're really free to think of whatever you want. And there's a feature in which you can ask for manual approval at any stage. So except on the source pool, but that's it. So that means that if you want to, after load test, before deploy to prod, to have a manual approval step, then we can definitely define that. And that's a really power of Code Pipeline. You're able to come up with very complex pipelines and customize them at your will. So remember the technology stack. So far we've seen AWS Code Commits, but now we're seeing the bottom. We're seeing the orchestration and the continuous delivery thanks to AWS Code Pipeline. Okay, so pipeline basically works with artifacts. And so each pipeline stage will create artifacts. And behind this very complicated name, it just means a bunch of files that are passed and stored through Amazon S3, and they will be passed on to the next stage. So what this looks like is that you have your Amazon S3 bucket, and then you get a trigger. So your source will get triggered. So for example, you've just pushed some code. And so this source will send everything, all the code to Amazon S3. That's called the source output artifacts. And it turns out that these artifacts will slowly come back up through the Amazon S3 bucket to go into the build stage. So Code Build will get this artifact, so it'll get the code from the source and build it, And after building it, it may also generate artifacts. So there may be like generated binaries or zip files or whatever, however you build your code really, and put this right back into Amazon S3 bucket. And then again, this output will be piped all the way up to your deploy stage to Code Deploy. So now Code Deploy as the output of your build stage, and for example, the zip file or the binaries, and they're able to just deploy your files. But this is just a simplistic view, but obviously you understand that each stage can output artifacts, and the next stage will get these artifacts. So you're really free around whatever you want to pass, and everything you do, everything you create can be passed on to the next stage, which is quite handy. So the exam will ask you around code pipeline troubleshooting, a lot of it. And so the first thing is that whenever there's a state change in the pipeline, it will generate an AWS CloudWatch event. So you need to be very careful. This will generate a CloudWatch event, and this event can trigger a SNS notification. So the examples of which you can do these things is, for example, when you want to create an event in case your pipeline has just failed and you want to receive a notification for it, you would use these rules. Or you can also create event, for example, when someone cancels a stage. I mean, you're really free around what events you want to have, but just so you know, these are created as CloudWatch event rules, and then they generate SNS notifications. Now, if Code Pipeline fails a stage, or your pipeline, just doesn't deploy anything, the reason is that if a stage has failed, and so your pipeline basically stops. Every time there's a failure, obviously we don't want to deploy to production if the build didn't succeed. And so when you get a failure, it's a good idea to send a SNS, a CloudWatch event, and then SNS notification. And then we can go in the console and look at the information and understand what happens. You can also audit API calls done to CloudWatch using AWS CloudTrail. We haven't seen CloudTrail yet, but basically it's just used to audit any API calls done across your Amazon infrastructure. So it's quite handy. And then finally, another very popular troubleshooting is that if pipeline can't perform an action, for example, it cannot deploy to Elastic Beanstalk, then it's usually an IAM service role issue. That means that your service role that you attach to your pipeline doesn't have enough permission. So it's just that the policy is incorrect or incomplete, and so you should just troubleshoot the policy. So this is it for pipeline troubleshooting. It's a very brief introduction because pipeline is actually quite straightforward to use, and I'd rather show it to you in practice. So come with me in the next lecture in which we'll do a hands-on.